You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Today's episode is being recorded with Audio-Technica microphones. We're tickled pink to be supported by Audio-Technica and encourage our listeners to check out their mics, headphones, and other gear on the B&H Photo website. Now, this is Macro Week at B&H Explorer, and we on the podcast are going deeper than macro. Today, we welcome Nathan Renfro. Nathan is a geologist, a gemologist, an analytic microscopist, and manager at the Gemological Institute of America. He's also a photographer, and when you combine all these passions, that makes you a photomicrographer, or is it a microphoscopist? We're going to figure that out soon, which enables you the ability to create unique and gorgeous images of the interiors of gems. We're going to speak with Nathan about his work, his gear, his technique, and his images, which you could see on Instagram at Micro Worlds of Gems. Welcome to our podcast, Nathan. We've enjoyed your pictures immensely, by the way. We really have.
Great.
Let's start off here. When you're looking at potential images within gems, your field of view is kind of tiny. It's fractions of a millimeter. But when you work in these spaces, it must feel like a whole universe of yourself. It's kind of like peering through a telescope in a sense, I would imagine, where these amazing worlds are out there. We just can't see them.
You know, you're exactly right, really. So, every time I sit down at the microscope, I feel like an explorer, but maybe a little bit of a lazy explorer. So instead of, strapping myself to a rocket and going on an adventure to the moon or something like that, I can sit in my pajamas and just look in my microscope and take a little trip to this microverse that, most likely nobody's ever explored if they've never looked into the same gem that I'm looking at. So yeah, every gemstone I look at, it's like a little adventure. And, you really don't know what kind of secrets or mysteries or strange observations that you might uncover every time you look in a gemstone.
I'm reading your background. You have a very, very interesting background that it seems like everything you've done so far has been to get you to where you are right now.
Yeah, it's kind of worked out that way. I mean, my grandfather was a miner and he had this rock collection. And then he died, and the rock collection wasn't labeled, so I kind of got interested in rocks and minerals from that. And then I went to university, and I was trying to figure out what some of these rocks and minerals were. So I would take them to the geology department, and the chair of the department, Dr. Jamie Allen, he would sit down every week with me and go through a box of rocks to help me figure out what this stuff was. But as a freshman, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. And as far as my university studies go. And so he said, well, why don't you just join the geology department? And really not having any better plan at that time, I thought, well, that seems okay. So that just sort of worked itself out in that way. And then from there, I was working at a tourist gem mine in North Carolina, and I came across a copy of Lapidary Journal, which is a magazine dedicated to stone cutting and gemstones and jewelry and things like that. And there was an advertisement in the back of that magazine for the Gemological Institute of America, where you could go to school to learn to become a gemologist. And while I was working at that gem mine, I was teaching myself how to cut gemstones, and I had no idea that you could be a gemologist. I didn't know that was even a career that people did. And so that advertisement really kind of piqued my interest, and I kind of decided that after I finished my geology program, I was going to go to California and go to school to become a gemologist. Not wanting to leave California,
How come?
Yeah, I know. I did. By the time I finished the GG program, I knew it was going to be getting cold in North Carolina soon, and I was enjoying the weather, and so I needed a reason to stick around so I could dodge winter that year. And so I actually got a job at G.I.A as a diamond grader, and that was what they were hiring for at that time. So I worked as a diamond grader for a little under a year, but really I knew my interest was in colored stones, and the colored stones department is a bit more specialized and a bit smaller department. So opportunities to work in color stones at G.I.A don't come up too often. But I just had a streak of good luck, I suppose, and a position opened up, and I applied and I got the job. And from there, it was another one of these sort of chance things there's a G.I.A.'s. At the time he was G.I.A.'s chief gemologist. His name is John Koivula, and he's probably the world's most renowned gemological photomicrographer, and he's published thousands and thousands of images, a whole series of books on inclusions in gems. And so basically I wound up working, just a few feet away from him, and we hit it off, and we became fast friends, and he became my mentor. So, I mean, it's kind of like if you were interested in basketball and Michael Jordan was your mentor, that was the position that I found myself in as far as gemology goes. And so, and then I had a lot of other, really experienced guys here at G.I.A to learn from. My bosses right now, who are Shane McClure and Dino Degano, so these giants in gemology who've got 40 years of experience. So you get to learn a lot in a really short amount of time. So then it became a lot of hours taking really bad photos in order to get my skills at the point where I could start to produce some decent photos, because I had no experience with photography. So not only did I have to learn all the lighting control for the stones themselves, but I really had to learn how to use a camera. I was really at that level. I hadn't used anything more than a point and shoot camera up until that point. So I really had to teach myself how a camera works at the same time as teaching myself how to light these gemstones to show the features I wanted to in the best way.
And were you still, is that a film camera at that point still, or were you shooting digital already?
At the time when I started at G.I.A, film was pretty much dead as far as photomicrography goes. They had already switched over to digital, but the digital cameras at that time were not that great. We're talking about, maybe 5 megapixel CMOS type cameras. Actually, no, those were CCD type cameras at that time. And so the resolution was okay enough to, print an image, a small image in a publication or something. But they were still, I mean, it's the performance of those cameras is nothing as to what it is, currently,
right.
Almost 15 years later.
So can I ask kind of a basic question? Is photomicrography just photo through a microscope? I mean, is that the general definition?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the short definition of it is, taking a photograph of something through the microscope. The implication there is that, it's a photograph of something that is magnified at larger than the scale it is naturally. So, larger than 1 times its size would be sort of how I would interpret what is, photomicrography.
What's the maximum magnification that you work at that's you can get something that's usable?
That's a good question. So when we think about magnification, there's a couple of ways we need to think about it. There's the magnification that I'm observing the specimen in the microscope, and the maximum magnification there is going to be about 1,000 power. Okay. When you get beyond that really gets beyond what you can resolve with light. So then you need to start going to like a electron microscope beyond that. But then there's also the recorded magnification. And so the magnification that is projected onto the camera, where you're actually recording the physical magnification factor, is usually quite a bit less than the observed magnification. And so it does depend on, how your microscope's set up and the combination of lenses between your subject and the camera.
Listening to all of this and reading about the technique and how you have to work this way, the word forensic keeps coming up. Is that something that you kind of have in your head when you're working on some things? Because I know that you use a lot of these photographs to identify what type of stone it is or what type of gem it is, and a lot of other things, little things like fractures and shapes give you clues as to what it is. Are there any forensic aspects of this? Have you ever been called in for anything of that magnitude,
Um,
any other type?
I wouldn't say that I've been called in for anything specifically for a forensic purpose, but when we're looking at gemstones, you're right. We're making observations in the microscope, and so gemology is really a observational science. It's a non-destructive technique. Because of the high value nature of the samples that we observe, we can't destroy the sample. So it's a way microscopy is a way we make observations and gather information about the stone without destroying it. Now, as far as forensics goes, I guess I could think about, we're often looking in the microscope for evidence of treatments and ways that people might manipulate gemstones to improve the appearance. And in that way, if a gemstone was treated in a way to improve the appearance and it was sold and that treatment wasn't disclosed, there are some implications of a crime happening there. And in that way, it could be a bit like, a forensic examination where we're looking for evidence of something that was done to the stone where a customer or client was misled. Part of G.I.A.'s mission is to ensure the public trust. So we're always looking for ways that stones have been manipulated or treated. There's all the time there are new treatments being developed to improve the appearance of these stones. And usually when a treatment first hits the market, it's, unfortunately, the reality is it's often not disclosed until we can identify what it is. And so we're always on the lookout for that sort of thing. So,
actually, what I really had in mind when I asked that question was, every once in a while you read about somebody, they found this rock and they discovered that it was actually came from Mars. It was from an asteroid or something like that, because there were certain tracers, certain marks, and certain identifiers when they examined this stone under, high magnification that gave it the fingerprints or the DNA of stones that we know came from Mars, just from what we've gathered. So I guess I was kind of going in that direction.
Okay. So, well, if we sort of remove the criminal aspect out of that, and detective work.
It's a fun thing to talk about, though. But
sure. When we look in the microscope, for sure, there's clues about gemstones in a lot of cases that do give us information about, where that stone came from. For sure, we use the observation of microscopic features and inclusions to help determine geographic origin of gemstones.
Right.
So in the gem trade, the provenance of a stone is highly important in a lot of cases. There are certain historic localities like sapphires from Kashmir, from the Kashmir deposit in India, or sapphires from Burma. And because of the historical implications there, those stones command a premium in the marketplace. And so we're able to look at the inclusions and microscopic features of gemstones, and in a lot of cases, we're able to make a determination if where in the world, geographically, a gemstone came from, and sometimes it's just as important to say that the stone didn't come from a certain place. So even if I can't say for sure this stone came from Burma, I might be able to tell you for sure it did not come from Burma, which can often be just as helpful. So,
in your work specifically, and also in the field in general, how does the applications kind of break down scientifically, and in this case, maybe commercially? And obviously, you're doing it in some ways for artistic purposes. But what is 90% of the work when done applied to?
So, as far as photomicrography specifically, or just microscopy related to gems?
I was saying to gems, really. Yeah.
So the vast majority of microscopy in gemology is one, to identify what is the gemstone. Certain gemstones are going to have inclusion suites that are unique to a certain gemstone. So it helps you figure out, one, what is the gemstone? And two, it helps you figure out if a gemstone's treated.
Right. But the driver is a commercial aspect of it, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
For my work, it's the commercial side. We provide a service to the gem and jewelry trade as an independent, third party, unbiased opinion of what is the material that you're selling, and the reports that we provide can then be used to either justify the price of the sale, or it may completely destroy the price because an item's not been represented correctly.
And is the photography aspect of it crucial nowadays? Especially in the digital world where you can get images to people quickly, or is that just kind of on the back end, and then you can kind of produce reports with them?
So I think for the day-to-day production work that we do, the photography is not so much applicable on the individual scale, but where the photomicrography comes in is we use photomicrography to document new findings or convey information about new treatments. We use it to document research stones, and all of that kind of information, from educating people and providing information about new materials and treatments. That information is at the core extremely important for the overall market. Everything that we do on the research side is done in order to support the commercial trade side.
Right. So can we talk a little bit about lighting? Because, we do want to get to the gear and the cameras you use and
Sure.
even, but it seems that lighting is so fundamental, obviously, to this. And maybe you could walk us through some of the different types of lighting that are utilized, and specifically talk a little bit about bright field and dark field. Yeah.
The main type of lighting that people would probably think about for gemology is dark field lighting, and that's where you have inclusions that stand out as bright features against a dark background. So that type of lighting works really well for diamonds and diamond grading, so that these any flaws or imperfections in the stone stand out and they're easy to see. However, that's probably not always the best type of lighting for photomicrography. So for most of my photos, I would say that probably 95% of the photos that I take, I've probably applied fiber optic illumination. And the reason is that you just have, really almost absolute control over where the light goes. So I can replicate a dark field environment or a bright field environment by using a fiber optic illuminator and using it to control where the light's going to go and how it's going to interact with the gem. So by far, fiber optic illumination is the most useful type of lighting in gemology. I also use things like polarizing filters. You have gemstones that are birefringent, which means they split light into two light paths. So you get this almost doubled image, especially when you're at higher magnification. That effect becomes more pronounced. So you have to use a linear polarizing filter to eliminate one of those doubled images so that you see a nice sharp image.
Now, depth of field is something that's a big issue when you get into these magnifications.
Sure.
I know. I just finished a project shooting household spices at 1:1 with 100 millimeter macro, and that can get pretty gnarly too. You're dealing with far greater magnifications, and
oh yeah, sure.
How do you get depth of field? I imagine focus stacking is part of your repertoire.
Yeah. So exactly. So when I first started out, focus stacking wasn't really a thing, at least not that I was aware of. And so in about 2011, that's when the concept of focus stacking and the application to gemology kind of came on my radar. And so, before that, it was just, the depth of focus that you got in the image, that was just all you could do based on the limits of the optics of your microscope. But with focus stacking, there's really no limit now. So I have for my microscope at work, it's a Nikon microscope, and it has a program that we use. It's called Nikon Elements, which is Nikon proprietary software, and it has an automated focus stacking function. But even with the older microscopes and the ones that I use at home, I can still take a series of Z-stacked images, and I use Helicon focus to get more depth out of my photos.
Are you manually focusing this, or are you using some kind of a mechanized drive? Because the movements are minuscule.
Yeah, right, exactly. So the short answer is both. The microscope system that I have here at G.I.A, it has a stepper motor attached, and it communicates to the software, and the computer actually controls the focus stacking movements at a regular interval.
Okay.
But a system like that's going to cost you, on the order of $50,000-$60,000.
We have an open budget. That's no problem. Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, that's one way to do it. That's certainly on the one extreme end. At home, I have, my microscope was made in 1984, so there's no sort of focus control on that other than the knob that you rotate yourself manually. And so what I did is my brother, who's a machinist, I had him make me a little bracket to hold a digital indicator so that I could measure the focus height or the movement of the travel of the microscope, so I can see in real time as I'm focusing the actual physical dimension that the microscope focus is moving. So if I have a good idea of the total depth that I'm trying to travel through, say it's 1 or 2 millimeters, then I can take that dimension and divide it up into maybe 20 or 30 frames, and say maybe I need to move the focus 1/10 of a millimeter at a time. And so I can see that using that digital indicator.
And are you looking at a monitor, or are you? I mean, the whole time you're looking at a monitor, correct? When you're doing this focus, or no?
So yeah, I'm looking at a monitor. I use a Canon camera, and it's tethered to a computer monitor for sure. But I'm also looking in the microscope. I always shoot with a trinocular microscope, so that means you have 3 optical ports, 1 for the camera and 2 for your eyes. So you still, it's still easier for me to see things how they're set up in the microscope and control the light while looking in the microscope. And then before I take the photo, the monitor is really used to confirm that the camera is seeing the same thing that I saw in the microscope.
When you first pick up a stone or a gem and you're looking at it with your naked eye, how much of what you ultimately photograph can you get a sense will be there? I mean, does that make sense? Like, I know you can't see it all, but from your experience and from holding it up in natural light, what gives you an indication? And maybe you can walk us through that process all the way to the microscope image.
That's a good question. And the short answer is the things that you can see with your naked eye come nowhere close to showing you what is truly possible to see in the microscope. I mean, it's night and day. I mean, with your naked eye, really, you can get a sense that there's something there, but to really appreciate the detail and the complexity of the inclusions that you see in the microscope, you got to look in the microscope. So really, every year there's a gem show in Tucson. It's one of the world's biggest gem shows. It's actually like 40 gem shows that go on at the same time. And so when I go to places like that, I'm often looking with my naked eye or with a 10x handheld loop. And so the starting point is with the naked eye. And so I'm looking for, stones or pieces of rough. And the first thing I look for is there a speck of something that's in a stone that maybe isn't supposed to be there? So it's really just, is it included or not included? And if there's an inclusion there, that's when I know, okay, I'll focus in on the inclusion with my loop and try to get an idea of if that stone's going to be interesting or not.
And when you say interesting, you're talking about from your artistic photographic sense now, like something that you think may be beautiful? Yeah.
So yeah, it could be. I mean, primarily when I'm looking for stones for myself for the purpose of photomicrography, yeah, I'm looking for things that are either have vibrant colors or interesting geometric shapes, or weird looking minerals or interesting landscape types of features, things like that. And sometimes you get an inclusion in stone, and it might seem kind of boring, or it might be something that I've already seen or have a better example of.
Right. Well, to me, what blows me away is, to hear you speak about it and then to see the images. And again, encourage all our listeners to check out Nathan's Instagram page. But just the difference between what I can imagine you can see, and then you see these insane geometrical shapes and colors. How close to what you're seeing through the microscope is the final product that you put out?
So the goal is always to make it as close to what I actually see as possible. So if you see the photomicrograph, that should be, a 90-95% representation of what you see in the gemstone. The trick is really the lighting control. So just because if I look at a stone in a microscope and take a photo of what I see, and then I hand that same stone to somebody else who doesn't understand how the lighting works, they're probably not going to always be able to see things that same way. And so understanding the lighting and how the lighting interacts with gems really helps you to bring out or maximize the impact of that photo.
Is there a standard color to start with? I mean, a starting point like daylight or 6000 K or UV or?
Not really. I mean, I think I have at home, I have just these 150 watt incandescent fiber optic lights. And then at work, I have these Nikon LED fiber optic lights, and they're set at a color temperature, I think it's 4000 K.
Okay.
And so the color temperature really is not important, because I really go back in and I white balance everything in post anyway. So the starting color is really not overly critical. So really it's at the post-production step is where I'm trying to get the image back to where it looks like it's supposed to, and that the color is representing the stone and not representing the light source.
But to what standard are you correcting it to? Where's your 18% gray or neutral? What are you basing?
Usually the starting point is I'm looking for anything in the image that should be a neutral white or gray.
Okay.
And so that's the starting point. And so I'm trying to be aware of things that should be a neutral color within the image. And so that's my reference. And also my reference is also my memory. It's probably not an exact science when we're working on the scale that I'm working at, but a lot of times it's there's a little bit of my interpretation of how that scene is supposed to look from the way I experienced it while looking in the microscope.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. We come back more with Nathan Renfro and ultra close-up photography of gems. Stay tuned. This episode of the B&H Photography Podcast is produced using Audio-Technica microphones. Check the link in our show notes for the Audio-Technica product page on the B&H website. Okay, we are back. Before I start talking about gear, I had one question I wanted to ask you. There's a quote I saw when looking at all of your sites, and it goes, "Photomicrographs do not only serve as an educational and research references, many are aesthetically pleasing," which I get, "and can be viewed as examples of natural art," which I get, "and have even been used as a marketing tool for gem materials." Can you elaborate? I'd like to know more about that.
The photomicrographs that I've taken, a lot of them have been used for, promotional materials at G.I.A. Subtle details like banners and things like that, where you need a little design element or a splash of color. And so in that way, it's still related to the product that we sell, which is education about gemology. So it's used for marketing in that way. I've also had jewelers and jewelry designers reach out to me about producing images that they can use for marketing, their jewelry. There's a jewelry store in Nebraska called Borsheim's, and they used to use photomicrographs taken by my mentor John Koivula in their entryway. They would kind of change them out quarterly depending on the season, and so maybe they would have inclusions that kind of made you think of snow-covered mountains in the wintertime, and they would kind of try to have a theme to use as decoration.
You mentioned the word inclusions a few times, and for our listeners, could you just give a quick definition of what that is?
Sure. Yeah. I guess that's a good place. We should have clarified. So most of the things that I'm taking photos of would be considered as an inclusion. And what an inclusion in a gemstone is basically any optically observable irregularity. It's the things that people generally wouldn't want in their stone. When you think about diamonds, which probably the most well-known gemstone, people tend to want flawless stones or stones without imperfections. But for the gemologist, it's those imperfections and those inclusions. That's the things that are interesting to me, because that's where all of the beauty lies. I mean, that's where the thing that I can.
Is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the interesting details are in those flaws, and that's what's unique to each certain stone. You'll never find two stones with the exact same inclusions in the exact same spot, and so these inclusions, they kind of act like a fingerprint for that specific gemstone, and that's what makes it unique. But really, it's just anything you can see in the microscope.
It's very interesting, but it's sort of like people who shoot portraits. It's easy to take a stunning portrait of a person who's flawless, okay? You have to work at it to take a bad picture. However, there's something intrinsically beautiful and fascinating about people who are, I'm going to say, quote unquote, not perfect. Older people, wrinkles, scars, and things of that sort.
Sure.
And sometimes those are where you really get the strong portraits. So what you're really talking about is the same thing, where these stones are again, that's where the personality and character is for these stones.
So you mentioned a bit about some of the cameras that you use at home and at work. Can you elaborate a bit on what are the standards now in the field, and how mirrorless might be changing that, if at all?
Sure. So as it pertains to photomicrography, the camera that I've used for the last, probably 10 years at home is a Canon 6D, which is a full frame sensor. It's got really good low light sensitivity. And when we're working in the microscope, there's a constant battle between, the stone and getting enough light through all the optics of your microscope to your camera. And so that's the camera that I've been using for quite a long time. But at work, I have some Nikon DSRI cameras they've basically taken the full frame sensor from a Nikon camera and took all the moving components out of it and kind of tailored it for microscopy, so it has good low light sensitivity and things like that.
And these are meant to go with Nikon microscopes, I'm assuming? It's part of their system, or you can adapt it to other ones?
So you can adapt it to other systems, but it's meant to go on a Nikon just by virtue of, it's got a Nikon, I think it's an F mount. The bayonet it's the Nikon standard mount that you would see on a Nikon DSLR. So it's got the mounting hardware for a Nikon, but you could apply it to a different microscope. You could put it on an Olympus microscope with a Nikon to Olympus adapter if you wanted to.
It's like mirrorless photography. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
And speaking again of mirrorless, given the fact that there may be less vibration and other aspects of low light capture that mirrorless cameras are generally achieving, do you see colleagues using mirrorless cameras now? So
I've seen a few colleagues using mirrorless cameras. Personally, I haven't used mirrorless cameras that much, but obviously for a microscope, it's going to be the way to go. Just by virtue of eliminating, shutter-induced vibration. I've over the years I've worked around, that problem with my particular setup, so it's not really been a problem for me. But if I was going to buy a new camera, I'd pretty much get a mirrorless camera just to make sure that problem didn't exist.
Aside from vibrations, I would say another advantage is with cameras, say the Sony A7S, the light gathering abilities of these cameras seems to be a natural for this sort of photography.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have, my cameras work pretty well. So again, I've not really been in the market for one, but I have, tried to look into it a little bit, and certainly the Sony Alpha series seems to be a strong contender as far as mating to a microscope for one not having a mirror, and also the low light sensitivity for sure.
It's interesting. The camera that you have, the 6T, is it kind of in certain circles a relatively old camera, and I've read and seen where you've spoken often of the value of older microscopes. Is the used market something that people interested in this should look into?
Well, that's actually a good question, and the short answer is yes, absolutely. They should look in the used market. That's where my microscopes came from. Really, actually, my main microscope that I use at home, it's a Nikon SMZ10. It was manufactured in, I think, 1984, and I was actually given that microscope was given to me by my mentor, John Koivula, and he won that microscope in the Nikon Small World Photomicrography competition, which he won in 1984, and that was the prize. And so then he used that microscope for 30 or so years, and then sort of handed it down to me, and now I'll get another 30 years of use out of it. But it's a research grade microscope, but even though, mine's got a little bit of sentimental value on top of the practical aspects of using it, you can still buy that exact model of microscope on eBay for pennies on the dollar. That microscope new would probably, or at least an equivalent microscope like that today would probably cost you $10,000-$20,000, and you can get online on eBay. And if you know what you're doing, you can get a comparable microscope for maybe $1,000. So the trade-off is that you want to be careful about if the instrument was abused. Is it in good shape? You might have to have a little knowledge of fixing a few things. My other microscope that I use, which I use for the differential interference contrast work, which we can talk about that if you
definitely.
like.
Yeah.
That microscope is a Zeiss. It's a Zeiss Universal, and I purchased it on the used market, and it took me a couple of years to get all the components and pieces together to make it do to get all the components for differential interference contrast microscopy. But in the end, I think I spent about $1,500 or $1,600 on that microscope, and an equivalent new system that would do the same thing would probably cost about $75,000. So it's out of what I could afford, but by getting an older instrument and kind of refurbishing it, I was able to get the same result, but at at really a very small fraction of the price.
Gotcha. So let's talk about differential interference contrast, because it seems to be at the heart of some of your most dynamic images, right?
Yeah, it really is. So in the case for my image, it's a reflected light technique, and you basically have light travel through a prism, which it's called a Nemarsky prism, and it splits the light into two sort of perpendicular light beams, and then that light travels through the prism and then through the objective lens on the microscope and then to your sample, which in the case of what I shoot for differential interference contrast is rough mineral crystals. And one of my favorites is a diamond. And the patterns that you see on these rough mineral crystals, it's often kind of a low contrast subject. It'd be all kind of grayscale, and you would see some subtle texture in there. But in order to bring out those patterns and textures in this low contrast subject, by using the Nemarsky hardware combined with the microscope, you have the light that travels through the objective lens, bounces off of the surface of the mineral, and then travels back through the objective lens and then back through the prism. And so the light coming out of the prism and then going back through the prism interferes with each other, and the interference color that's produced depends on the path length that the light travels. So when you have this sort of irregular topography, you can have two adjacent areas sort of side by side that are a little bit different elevation, and so you'll get these side by side areas with a completely different contrasting color. And so it's a false color technique, but you're seeing that that's actually what you see in the microscope. It's a lighting control technique to give you this, extreme amount of contrast in what would otherwise be a exceedingly low contrast subject.
Wow. And the results are just incredible. I'm looking at one of those images now.
Yeah.
Hard to believe that it's actual, a natural element, natural item. Can you then control, for example, the light source to then change those color dynamics?
Yeah.
Within the
so that's a great question. So yes, you can control the basically the color suite that you see by manipulating the position of the prism relative to the light path. And so your prism is kind of oriented at this 45-degree direction relative to the polarization angle of the light. And so you kind of sweep this prism kind of laterally, and you go from low order interference to high order interference colors. And so you can produce a high contrast grayscale image by putting the prism position at the low order area within the Nemarsky prism. But for me personally, for my style of shooting, I generally prefer the vibrant colors, and so I tend to put the prism in sort of this high order interference position. I usually like a lot of blues and oranges and things like that, so I probably gravitate to those colors. But you can absolutely control that color that you see by the position of the prism, and you can see that you watch that change in real time in your microscope. And so when you're rotating my microscope has a rotational control which causes this lateral shift in the prism position. But so when I'm adjusting this prism position, I can just watch until I see the colors that I think make the image look the best. And then once I see what I like the best, then I stop moving the prism, and then that's when I can take the photo.
And do you fire with remote control? And how many images do you usually take?
So, I use remote shooting software, tailored to the computer to shoot the image, or sometimes I'll use my camera has a Wi-Fi function, so I do like controlling the camera from the app on my phone too. In worst case, if a piece of equipment's not working, I'll set it on a 10-second delay timer or something so that it gives time for all the vibration to settle down. Sometimes I'll do for those differential interference contrast shots, sometimes I'll do a suite of images where I'll maybe take the grayscale photo and then I'll change the color and then take a blue photo and then a yellow photo and a pink photo. And I've produced suites of images like that where you kind of have this sort of Andy Warhol vibe where you have the same inclusion scene shot with a series of different colors. Or maybe I'm just not sure which one I like the best, so I'll go ahead and shoot multiple colors and then decide later in post which one I like the best. So, and then sometimes, it's very obvious to me which one's the best, and maybe that is the only one that I shoot. And then you also have the other layer of complexity of if I don't have enough depth in the image, then I might have to do some focus stacking. And in that way, then I may be shooting 30 images per each final image.
Have you ever started photographing a gem and just never came up with a picture that you felt did it justice?
Oh, sure. I would say, when I first started out, you only see the good photos on Instagram, so there's a lot of bad photos too,
right? I thought I was the only one who did that.
So obviously, that's, to me, that's generally the best. I mean, but I also think it's, I also publish, what I would consider just sort of quick and dirty photos in there that maybe aren't the best, but I think are interesting or tell an interesting story. But, if I'm not in the mood to shoot or spend a lot of time on shooting a photo, some of those photos I might have worked on for 5 minutes and some I might have worked on for a couple of hours. So it just depends on what the stone is and what does it have to, is there something that the audience can gain from the photo, even if it's not my best photo? That doesn't mean that I wouldn't post it, but if I think it's really just a garbage photo, certainly I just don't even bother showing it, or I don't even save it, and then I just try again later.
Gotcha.
And how about day-to-day photography? Do you shoot out in the real world, and does that aspect affect your compositions and the way you work in the microscope?
That's a really good question. It does. So as I mentioned, I didn't start out with a background in photography, and so I really had to learn about photography. And once I bought my Canon 6D camera, I got it with a lens bundle, which was it came with a 24-105 lens, which is pretty good, just all around general purpose zoom lens. And so I actually found that I actually liked photography. And so I started doing some landscape photography and, some nature photography. And G.I.A actually has an office in New York. And so I would do some street photography. And so I think that forcing myself to do more traditional types of photography helped me learn how a photographer would operate. I mean, if it wasn't for that experience, I don't think I would have the foundation in photography to know how to apply it to photomicrography, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I gained a ton of experience from traditional photography for sure.
And are you still shooting?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Anytime I go on vacation, I always bring my camera bag now, which I used to not because I didn't have a professional grade camera. And so, I shoot pictures of my kids and my pets. And, when I go to interesting locations, I just went to Big Sur not that long ago, and I did some landscape photography up there just for fun. And I still absolutely am a pretty avid hobbyist photographer as far as that goes.
Nathan, if I can ask one more question, what is a micro tear?
Oh, micro tear. So,
and if you want to get your lawyer first, go ahead. You can make the call right now.
So, the term micro tear kind of evolved at a gem show with a couple of my friends who are also photomicrographers. Danny Sanchez, he's a really talented photomicrographer based in Los Angeles. His Instagram is at Mineralian, and so he's one of the so-called micro tears. And then the other micro tear is a gal in Bangkok. Her name is Billy Hughes. And you can see her work at Lotus Gemology. And also, if you search Billy Hughes, Billie Hughets. And so we're all three photomicrographers who specialize in photomicrography of gem materials and good friends. And so I think it was maybe her dad that coined the term micro tears at one of the Tucson trade shows one year. And that's sort of the origin of the term micro tears.
All right. Okay.
So be sure to check out their Instagram for lots of other interesting gem-related photomicrographs. Will
do. And I guess that Tucson is the place to be then for the gem world whenever that comes.
Not this year, unfortunately, but generally speaking, Tucson in February is just it's a really huge event. It goes on for a few weeks, and again, it's like 40 gem shows, all concentrated in the city limits of Tucson, and anything gem related is going to be going on in Tucson for sure.
Nate, there's been a terrific conversation. We all learned more than a few things here today. Of people, do you have any? First of all, do you have any kind of exhibitions or any projects coming up that we should be aware of?
I do have a few projects in the works. I'm working on a couple of book projects, but the completion date on projects like that is always a question mark. It's one I've been working on for a couple of years, accumulating images. So I got no idea when I'll finish that up, but there are some projects like that in the works. And then otherwise, I do have part of my role here at G.I.A. I'm also the section editor for the journal Gems and Gemology for the Micro World section, and that's a quarterly section that it comes out in that journal, and it's really microscopy centered, and it's usually just little short notes on interesting observations in gems and gem materials, and so you can always check out G.I.A.'s journal, Gems and Gemology, and see that section to see interesting notes about microscopic features in gems.
Okay, and you also have an ongoing Instagram site, right?
Yep, yeah. I try to, turn out as much content there as I can. Sometimes it's a little bit slower, and sometimes there's quite a bit more. But yeah, I think there's probably over 1,000 photomicrographs posted on that on Instagram.
Yeah, to see more of Nathan's work, it's Micro World of Gems is his tag on Instagram, and it's well worth investigating that. And again, if you didn't catch it, it is in the show notes. Okay, Nathan, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure talking with you. And again, our listeners want to see more of your work. All of the addresses are in our show notes, and don't miss it, okay?
All right, thanks very much.
Pleasure. Okay, that's a wrap of another episode. Thanks again to our friends at Audio-Technica for the loaner microphones that we used on this show. They are wonderful. If you are not a subscriber to our podcast, all you have to do is go to Spotify or wherever you snag your favorite podcast and type in B&H Photography Podcast, hit enter, and boom, you are enrolled. And if you're already a subscriber, leave a nice comment. The boss reads this stuff too. You can also find us on the B&H Explorer website and on the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group page. Unless told otherwise, my name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of John Harris and Jason Tables, thank you so much for tuning in today.